We often imagine action films as carefully synchronized constructs, stories assembled with precision, performances built on steady emotional progression, and productions unfolding according to an orderly script. But the truth buried beneath Hollywood's polished surface tells a different story. Many of its most unforgettable action films were born from disorder, built from scenes captured at the wrong time, under the wrong conditions, and in emotional states that didn't yet make sense. What appears seamless on the screen was frequently held together by instinct rather than structure. Directors found themselves chasing daylight, rewriting scenes while standing beside the camera, and trying to preserve a narrative thread that kept slipping out of reach. Actors were thrust into moments of intensity long before their characters had earned that emotional weight. The next day, they were asked to return to earlier scenes lighter, calmer, untouched by events that had already been shot. Continuity wasn't a guiding principle. It was a problem no one had the time to solve. From desert storms to collapsing sets, from unpredictable actor schedules to scripts that evolved faster than they could be printed, these films were shaped by forces that constantly pushed them toward failure. Yet somehow, through a blend of determination, improvisation, and sheer creative resilience, each production survived long enough to become a finished work. The chaos behind the camera vanished, replaced by stories that felt fluid, intentional, and complete. Tonight, we uncover the hidden reality behind those films, the productions held together by fragments, guesswork, and moments captured wildly out of sequence. These are the action movies that should have fallen apart, but didn't. Fact 1: Mad Max, Fury Road. Step onto the set of Mad Max, Fury Road, and you would find a production moving in every direction except forward. The Namibian desert, beautiful but merciless, dictated the schedule more ruthlessly than any human plan ever could. Entire sequences were filmed because the weather allowed it, not because the story called for them. One day, the crew captured moments of explosive intensity. The next, they jumped backward into quieter exchanges meant for the early chapters of the film. The emotional progression of the characters was shattered before it had even formed. Tom Hardy struggled to understand which mental state Max was supposed to inhabit. Charlize Theron, too, found herself delivering scenes of anguish before she had filmed the events that caused them. George Miller held onto his sprawling vision with both hands as shifting dunes, sudden winds, and logistical chaos tore the narrative out of sequence. Continuity became an act of survival. The team relied on patched-together notes to trace emotional rhythms that refused to stay consistent. But when all the fragments finally came together, something remarkable happened. The disoriented way the actors performed, the rawness of their emotions, the jagged rhythm of the footage, every piece aligned with the fractured world Fury Road sought to portray. What looked like a film on the brink of collapse evolved into a landmark of controlled cinematic madness. And if this wasteland of disruption somehow birthed a masterpiece, the next production shows how a spy thriller nearly crumbled under constantly shifting pages and a story rewritten faster than it could be filmed. Fact 2: The Bourne Ultimatum. The Bourne Ultimatum was built on tension and speed, yet behind the camera it existed in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Paul Greengrass rewrote the script while shooting, tearing out scenes, reshaping dialogue, and reinventing motivations moments before filming them. Matt Damon walked into takes unsure whether he was portraying Bourne at the start of his emotional unraveling or racing toward its conclusion. Chronology became an abstract idea. Performance became educated guesswork. Because the film required multiple cities and tight location windows, the crew shot whatever they could get first. Climactic chases were captured before the scenes that explained them. Conversations carrying emotional weight were recorded after the decisions that led to them. Editors later compared the raw material to a deck of cards tossed across the floor. Nothing connected, nothing flowed, nothing adhered to the script's intended order. Universal watched the chaos anxiously, fearing they were investing in a narrative that couldn't be pieced together. Additional reshoots added even more variations, each carrying its own emotional tone. But when the fragments were finally woven into place, the fractured process gave the film a sense of immediacy, a mirrored reflection of Bourne's fractured identity. Still, the instability of this production pales in comparison to the next, where two leads were asked to build a partnership from scenes filmed almost entirely backwards. Fact 3: Die Hard with a Vengeance. On screen, Die Hard with a Vengeance explodes with relentless momentum. Off-screen, momentum was the last thing the production had. Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson filmed scenes of distrust, panic, and reluctant teamwork without any consistent emotional roadmap. One day, they captured confrontations meant for the finale. The next, they retrace their steps into early banter, filled with tension, but not yet hostility. Their chemistry, so central to the film, had to be constructed from emotional fragments rather than natural evolution. Director John McTiernan juggled a script not originally designed as a Die Hard film. Pages were rewritten nightly to retrofit the story to its new leads. Sequences were filmed out of order because locations were available at unpredictable times, and the actors often relied on subtle clues, stains, sweat, bruising to determine where they were supposed to be in the storyline. The production moved like a puzzle, assembling itself without the picture on the box. Yet, somehow, the jagged way it was filmed gave the movie its raw, urban energy. The uneven emotional beats created a sense of unpredictability that mirrored New York's chaotic pulse. What should have been a mess became a thriller held together by sheer kinetic force. But if this partnership survived disorder, the next production explores how reimagining a legendary character became even more complicated when the emotional core of the story was filmed completely out of psychological sequence. Fact 4, Casino Royale. Rebuilding James Bond from the ground up required precision, but Casino Royale was engineered under circumstances that tore every expectation apart. Due to rigid location windows and unpredictable weather, Daniel Craig was pushed into filming some of Bond's most brutal moments before laying the emotional foundation that made them meaningful. The infamous torture sequence, meant to represent Bond's psychological breaking point, was shot while Craig was still navigating the early layers of who this newly rebooted 007 was supposed to be. Martin Campbell and his team attempted to track Bond's emotional status with diagrams and marked scripts, but the shifting schedule turned those efforts into a scramble. Scenes of budding trust between Bond and Vesper were captured weeks after Craig had already filmed moments of deep emotional collapse. Early introductions had to be played after the raw intensity of later events. Every day demanded careful recalibration. Was Bond hardened, wounded, guarded, or still open to the world? Remarkably, the disorder disappeared in the final cut. The emotional through line emerged as if it had been designed with meticulous care, not pieced together from scattered fragments. The very instability of production gave Bond's transformation a jagged realism that helped define the new era of the character. But if constructing a new 007 felt challenging, the next film thrust the cast into even deeper unpredictability, shaping one of cinema's most iconic villains from scenes captured in near-total disarray. Fact 5. The Dark Knight. The making of The Dark Knight carried a mythic aura, but the reality behind the camera was a mosaic of uncertainty. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker, now considered one of the greatest performances in film history, was captured out of linear order, often months apart, due to scheduling constraints and the secrecy Nolan demanded. Ledger delivered chilling, carefully calibrated intensity in scenes that would appear late in the film, long before the narrative spine had even been shaped around them. A massive warehouse fire destroyed key sets, forcing the production to overhaul its schedule overnight. Some of Batman's most consequential scenes were shot without the emotional buildup that normally informs performance. Christian Bale moved between versions of Bruce Wayne and Batman that existed in different stages of psychological wear, often within the same week. The continuity team worked constantly to track emotional states, but even they admitted later that the Joker's scenes were filmed like shards from different worlds. The disjointed shoot somehow enriched the film's atmosphere. Ledger's unpredictable entrances and tonal shifts mirrored the Joker's chaotic essence. The villain seemed to materialize from nowhere because, in truth, his performances were captured across an unpredictable landscape of fractured filming days. Yet even this level of chaos would be matched and in some ways surpassed by the next production, where the emotional progression of machines and humans alike was assembled from a timeline torn apart by sheer ambition. Fact 6. Terminator 2. Judgment Day. On Terminator 2, the camera never moved in a straight line. James Cameron's colossal vision pushed the production through steel factories, desert landscapes, and complex effects setups, all available only in brief, scattered intervals. This meant scenes revealing the T-800's transformation from unfeeling machine to reluctant protector were filmed before the scenes showing his earliest, coldest behavior. Arnold Schwarzenegger had to adjust between emotional neutrality and subtle empathy without the continuity of a linear narrative. Linda Hamilton faced an equally disorienting challenge. Some of Sarah Connor's most fractured, paranoid moments were recorded after she had already filmed scenes in which the character had regained clarity and control. The emotional shifts demanded razor-sharp awareness, yet the constantly shifting schedule made consistency nearly impossible. Crew members joked that the continuity binders weighed more than some of the equipment. Through the chaos, Cameron kept a mental blueprint of the story's emotional structure. His ability to hold the film's arc in his mind allowed editors to reconstruct a coherent emotional progression from footage filmed months out of sequence. What emerged was a groundbreaking achievement that felt unified and deliberate despite being built from fragments. But if Cameron managed to tame that chaos, the next production on the list didn't stand a chance. Its narrative was inherently fractured, built around loops and resets that pulled the shoot into its own temporal disorder. Fact 7. Edge of Tomorrow. Some stories bend time on screen. Edge of Tomorrow bent time behind the camera as well. Because the narrative is built on repetition, death, reset, repeat, the production quickly lost any sense of a linear emotional path. Scenes representing completely different phases of William Cage's development were captured in close proximity, forcing Tom Cruise to navigate shifts from bewildered novice to hardened warrior with almost no warning. Wearing the massive exosuit only intensified the strain, turning each out-of-order moment into a physical and mental challenge. Doug Liman constantly reworked structure, mid-shoot, altering dialogue, tone, and even plot mechanics while the cameras rolled. Emily Blunt moved between Rita's hard-edged indifference and her brief moments of empathy without a clear trajectory to follow. Locations were available sporadically, resulting in late-stage loops being filmed before early ones had even been conceptualized. Attempts at maintaining emotional continuity eventually collapsed under the demands of the shoot. Intuition replaced planning. Strangely, the disorder became part of the film's texture. The fractured shoot echoed the fractured timeline, letting the emotional disorientation seep naturally into the story. The film's final shape, sharp, rhythmic, relentless, emerged from the very chaos that threatened to tear it apart. And if time loops distorted structure here, the next production would face a very different distortion. A film forced to build its story backwards from a stunt so extreme it reshaped every part of the narrative. Fact 8. Mission Impossible. Rogue Nation. On most productions, the climax comes last. Rogue Nation did the opposite. The team filmed Tom Cruise clinging to the side of an Airbus, one of the most dangerous stunts in franchise history before the characters, story dynamics, or emotional stakes were fully defined. Because the aircraft was available only briefly, the shoot began with a sequence intended to anchor the film's intensity, leaving the rest of the story to be reverse-engineered around it. Christopher McQuarrie rewrote major sections of the script based on footage that already existed. Injuries sustained during shooting forced Cruise to delay certain scenes, pushing the remainder of the story even further out of sequence. Emotional exchanges were captured before the characters had formed their relationships. Betrayals were filmed before trust had been established. Editors later admitted the narrative had to be assembled, as if solving a puzzle whose pieces had been mailed in random order. Paramount executives worried the production was steering itself into disaster, but McQuarrie leaned into the chaos, shaping character arcs around the stunts instead of the other way around. The finished film flows with confidence, even though its creation ran in reverse. Yet the instability of Rogue Nation is only one kind of chaos. The next production had to fight the geography of Los Angeles itself, freeways that opened and closed like shifting tides. Fact 9. Speed. Speed appears impossibly smooth on screen, but its creation was anything but. Because Los Angeles freeways could be closed only in short, unpredictable windows, the film was built from whatever segments of road the city allowed. This shattered the script's intended progression. Keanu Reeves filmed scenes of rising panic on days when Jack Traven was meant to be calm and controlled. Sandra Bullock delivered her early character moments long before she and Reeves had a chance to build any natural rapport. Explosion sequences, including the one that triggers the central crisis, were filmed at the tail end of production, after many quieter interactions had already been completed. Director Jan de Bont attempted to preserve a sense of escalating tension, but the fractured schedule made the emotional arc feel like a maze. Continuity notes piled up, only to be discarded when the next freeway option forced the shoot in a different direction. Yet the jagged process gave the film its pulse. The uneven filming added a raw, breathless energy that mirrored the bus's uncontrollable momentum. Instead of undermining the movie, the chaos behind the scenes infused it with the urgency that defined it. But if Speed thrived on physical instability, the next production would battle emotional instability, shifting tones, rewrites, and performances filmed entirely out of balance. Fact 1. Zero Lethal Weapon 2. The production of Lethal Weapon 2 unfolded like a constant negotiation with unpredictability. Sudden shifts in Los Angeles, weather forced the crew to capture whatever scenes they could, regardless of where they sat in the emotional arc. Mel Gibson stepped into Riggs's unstable fury one afternoon, only to return the next morning to portray the character's lighter, more relaxed banter, as if rewinding Riggs's entire psychological journey overnight. Danny Glover often faced the opposite challenge, delivering comedic warmth immediately after intense shoots that left his character shaken. Rewrites arrived in a steady stream, reshaping motivations and shifting emotional beats without warning. Scenes meant to build tension were filmed long after their payoffs, while early relationship moments were captured only after the actors had already shot their most volatile confrontations. Even the continuity team expressed frustration as emotional logic drifted farther and farther from any consistent path. Yet the final film carries a strange electricity born from its disorder. The fractured nature of the shoot imbued the lead's dynamic with a raw unpredictability, perfectly matching the volatile world Riggs and Murtaugh occupy. But while tonal turbulence shaped this production, the next film on our list wrestled with something deeper: the collision between two worlds, each reshaping the story's sequence in their own way. Fact 1-1: The Matrix. Creating The Matrix meant pushing boundaries, but the path to invention often came in pieces. Keanu Reeves, still recovering from neck surgery, was required to film several physically demanding sequences months before the quieter philosophical scenes that defined Neo's awakening. This meant Reeves shifted between versions of Neo whose emotional clarity had not yet been built or would not be filmed until much later. Lawrence Fishburne and Carrie-Anne Moss described the process as entering scenes without knowing whether they were initiating Neo's transformation or responding to its aftermath. The production bounced between the bleak real world and the stylized Matrix simulation based solely on set availability. Bullet time sequences so technically complex that they required immense preparation were captured well before the narrative had earned Neo's newfound abilities. Meanwhile, the Wachowskis refined the script as ideas evolved, creating inconsistencies between early footage and the story's later philosophical layers. Editors later described assembling the film as working with parallel interpretations of the same universe, each one slightly misaligned with the next. Yet the fractured process ultimately mirrored the story's core themes: the instability of reality, the disorientation of awakening, and the collapse of linear understanding. But where The Matrix embraced conceptual fragmentation, the next production suffered from something more basic, starting a multi-million-dollar blockbuster without a finished script. Fact 2: Iron Man. Before it became the foundation of the Marvel Empire, Iron Man began as a high-wire act built on improvisation. Without a fully realized script, Robert Downey Jr. shaped Tony Stark's personality moment by moment, riffing through scenes that would ultimately define the character. Emotional turning points were filmed before the events that fueled them. Playful exchanges were captured long before the dramatic weight that should have supported them existed. Gwyneth Paltrow reacted in real time, navigating Stark's shifting tone with instinct rather than predetermined trajectory. Jon Favreau encouraged spontaneity, which created a vibrant energy on set but wreaked havoc on emotional structure. Action scenes were shot whenever effects, teams, or locations were ready, leaving the film's narrative progression scattered across weeks of disjointed shooting. The production moved like a creative experiment, part planning, part intuition, part improvisation. Marvel's executives worried that the film's foundation was too unstable to carry the weight of launching a new universe. Editors later revealed that they unearthed Stark's emotional arc only after stitching together countless disparate moments, treating the footage like artifacts waiting to be assembled into meaning. Ironically, it was this instability that gave Tony Stark his iconic edge. The spontaneity, the volatility, the unpredictable charm. They were all reflections of a character born from chaos. But while improvisation sustained Iron Man, the next production would encounter a different challenge: juggling an ensemble cast so scattered that the film's emotional spine had to be built from absent moments and fragmented interaction. Fact 1-3: The Expendables. Gathering a powerhouse lineup of action legends promised spectacle, but The Expendables quickly turned into a juggling act no production team could fully control. Each actor had a different schedule, leaving the crew to assemble scenes like mismatched puzzle pieces. Dialogue exchanges were often filmed with one actor speaking shooting to a placeholder, with the other half recorded weeks later. Stallone, tasked with both starring and directing, shifted between intense combat scenes and quieter emotional beats depending solely on which cast members were available, not where those moments belonged in the narrative. The script functioned more as a moving target than a fixed blueprint. Entire sequences were shot without all the players present, forcing Stallone to imagine the energy and chemistry that would eventually bind the team together. Emotional development, moments of camaraderie, and crucial confrontations were scattered across months of filming with no consistent flow. In the editing room, Stallone essentially built the team dynamic retroactively, stitching isolated performances into a cohesive brotherhood. What might have been a disjointed result instead became part of the film's identity. Its rough, hard-edged tone reflected the on-set challenges, mirroring mercenaries who form a unit not through harmony, but through necessity. But where the Expendables wrestled with clashing schedules, the next production fought something even more unpredictable: the unforgiving brutality of nature and the political winds surrounding it. Fact 1 for Rambo: First Blood Part 2. Shooting Rambo: First Blood Part 2 in the dense jungles of Mexico meant surrendering the production to the environment. Storms rolled in without warning, collapsing plans and forcing last-minute rearrangements. Sylvester Stallone had to portray a spectrum of emotions: rage, sorrow, restraint, calculation based entirely on what the weather allowed them to film. Scenes of explosive intensity were captured before the quieter, introspective moments designed to set them up. Emotional progression became a casualty of shifting skies and unstable terrain. Political sensitivity further destabilized the process. As global sentiment changed, studio executives pushed for script adjustments that reshaped character motivations and thematic direction. A scene meant to mark a turning point one week might be rewritten the next, rendering the footage already shot emotionally misaligned. Even veteran continuity supervisors admitted they were chasing an arc that kept mutating in real time. Yet these fractures seeped into Rambo's portrayal in meaningful ways. His volatility, his internal turmoil, his sense of being unmoored from certainty all reflected the chaos that shaped the film's creation. The production's instability became the texture of its protagonist's fractured identity. But even this blend of political and environmental turbulence was eclipsed by the next film, a production dictated by real-world tensions that disrupted not just the schedule, but the very shape of the narrative. Fact 1-5 Behind Enemy Lines. Filming behind enemy lines under the shadow of geopolitical tension meant the production lived in a constant state of alert. Locations in Eastern Europe could be approved one day and deemed unsafe the next, forcing the crew into rapid relocations. Director John Moore recorded scenes wherever conditions allowed, even if they belonged at opposite ends of the story. Owen Wilson had to perform states of panic, exhaustion, determination, and shock without any dependable sense of what his character had already experienced or had yet to face. Gene Hackman's limited availability intensified the fragmentation. His storyline, central to the film's emotional spine, was captured early, before the rest of the narrative stakes had solidified. This created a split reality. One half of the movie filmed months ahead in a controlled environment, the other half shot in unstable locations where the story constantly reshaped itself. Editors later described the raw material as parallel films colliding into one. Complex political sensitivities forced abrupt rewrites, altering allegiances and motivations with little warning. Actors sometimes performed for a version of the story that no longer existed by the time the next day's script arrived. Post-production became an exercise in reconstruction, building coherence out of footage shaped by disruption. In the end, the instability became part of the film's pulse. It felt dangerous because it had been made under danger. It felt chaotic because chaos defined its creation. Bonus fact: hard target. Some productions fracture because of circumstance. Hard Target fractured because two visions collided so violently that the film's identity kept dissolving and reforming. John Woo entered the project with a signature-style, graceful slow-motion chaos, symbolic imagery, and choreographed violence shaped with almost painterly intent. Jean-Claude Van Damme, on the other hand, sought to reshape the film around his own presence, pushing for edits and reshoots that aligned with his vision of an American action hero. The result was a production that felt like it existed in a tug of war, constantly being pulled in opposing directions. Scenes were captured with Woo's meticulous touch, only to be reworked days later with new intentions. Emotional beats were played for arcs that changed overnight. Choreographed sequences meant to highlight Woo's balletic sensibilities were abruptly trimmed or refocused to emphasize Van Damme's star power. The contradictions seeped into every corner of the production, leaving cast and crew unsure which film they were actually making on any given day. By the time editing began, the footage resembled multiple versions of the same story layered on top of one another, each one communicating a different tone. One moment carried Woo's operatic flair, the next felt grounded, blunt, and distinctly shaped by Van Damme's input. Continuity became almost impossible to maintain, not because scenes were out of order, but because the film itself kept shifting identities. In the end, what reached the screen was less a completed vision than a recovered one assembled from fragments of competing creative forces. Hard Target didn't simply endure chaos, it was defined by it. The film that survived was the only one capable of emerging from the battlefield between two authors, fighting to control the same story. When you look past the polished final cuts of these films, a different kind of Hollywood comes into view, one built not on flawless orchestration, but on last-minute improvisation, instinct under pressure, and a constant struggle to hold collapsing pieces together. Some productions survived because of relentless determination, others because their chaos accidentally mirrored the stories they were trying to tell. What remains is a collection of films that feel seamless only because the turmoil behind them has been carefully hidden. So now the question is yours. Which of these near disasters surprised you the most? And do you think the final films reflect deliberate craftsmanship or the miraculous coherence born from chaos barely held at bay?